Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Raleigh and I actually have an interesting topic for you guys today discussing recycling in the United States and whether recycling is in fact as good as we think it is for the planet. I'm someone who always, does my best to be environmentally conscious. I do my best to reuse things and reduce the amount of things that I use and recycle as often as I can. But I came across some information that really got me thinking about this the other day, and it actually does make me question whether recycling in the current state that it's in the United States is a positive thing. I'm not saying recycling is a bad concept in a vacuum, right? Recycling things makes total sense, but just given the way the United States recycles today, I think it's interesting to discuss and kind of go from there and evaluate it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on your opinion on this as well. So if you find this interesting, please share with your friends and family. I think it's an interesting topic and worth discussing. And of course, I'm always open and appreciate the love and support that I get from you guys in terms of liking and subscribing to the channel and things like that. So with that said, in order to start off this discussion about recycling being good for the environment or not in the current state that it's in the United States, let's actually take a quick trip down memory lane and look at the past of recycling and how it started and began and kind of go from there. I think it's a good place to kind of start off from. So let's jump into it. So recycling actually started in the 1960s, early 1970s as a way for the United States really to support its war efforts of the time. So really the government was looking for a way to collect extra rubber and tin and steel in order to repurpose it and unfortunately make it into, well, more war materials. Now, as the 1970s and 1980s kind of really rolled along, we had the birth of things like Earth Day and some of the more green movements that we know of today really started to kind of take form. And at that point, recycling shifted away from like an effort to support war efforts into really an effort to support the planet and some of the more environmentally friendly movements that were taking place. Now, if we fast forward a little bit, we end up in the 1990s, which at that point, China started purchasing a lot of our recycled materials, which meant a massive shift for the United States. At that point, we ultimately shifted away from collecting and recycling these plastics, glass and papers and things of that nature in order to reuse to create things here in the United States. And instead, we packaged it up and sold it to China, where they would then repurpose those materials to make things which they would then send back to us. So really in the 1990s, there was a big shift from recycling and using things here in the United States to collecting recyclable materials and selling it to China. Now, come 2018, China actually made a big announcement that really kind of dropped a bomb on the United States. And that was that they would no longer be the waste basket for the world, and they would no longer purchase recycled materials or waste from other countries. So once China kind of removed itself from the buyer of this system, it actually took the whole US recycling system and kind of put it on its head, unfortunately. The reason being is the US was basically established in terms of recycling to collect recyclable material and then sell it to China for a profit. So as soon as China kind of stepped out of that equation and said, we're no longer buying your waste, basically the United States didn't know what to do with all of its recyclable material. We didn't have the means to kind of manage it or deal with it on our own. We no longer had the means to convert it into materials that we could then reuse and things like that. And so instead it started to just pile up at all these landfills. And all these landfills are local, so they dealt with them different. There's no like national landfill, but really it put them in a situation where they ended up having to pay people to come and collect their recyclable goods. And there was even a time where a lot of these companies stopped recycling altogether or even just acted like they were recycling, and I'll get into more of that later, but they basically tried to get rid of their recycling programs because they were incurring costs in order to recycle rather than turning a profit like they originally did. So for example, in Bakersfield, California, they used to turn $65 profit on every ton of recycled material that they collected and sold. And now they're actually incurring a cost of $25 just to get rid of it. And that doesn't include the cost of like sorting it and managing it and all that stuff. That's just paying someone $25 a ton to come and get rid of it and collect it and recycle it on their own, wherever that might be, right? So what that means ultimately is it made the most financial sense for these companies, right? They're businesses, right? There's no federal recycling company. These businesses, these local waste management companies, to instead go ahead and take all of these recycled materials and dump them into the landfill. And so what that means is ultimately, while you might have like a blue bin and a green bin and a brown bin saying like separate your trash and your recyclables and your garden waste, in fact, the unfortunate thing about that is although we do that and it seems like some of this might be recycled, most of it just ends up in the landfill and gets trashed. Now, while the current state of recycling in the United States is a total bummer, right? Because as I outlined, we basically throw everything into the landfill. I actually want to make the case that that's better than what we used to do when we sold all of our recyclable materials, or a lot of it, to China to deal with. So just to demonstrate this, I want to walk through a scenario with you. So let's say it's 2017 and I drank a plastic bottle of, let's say, juice, for example. I would drink that juice, right? And I would throw that into a recycle bin. And then that recycle bin would get picked up by a truck, and that truck would then take that bottle to a waste management plant, let's say, where they would sort it and clean it a little bit, and then they'd collect it with other bottles, and they would put it on another truck, and then that truck would get driven all the way to like a dock or a shipping port of some sort, where it'd get loaded up on a huge boat, and then that boat would then transfer my bottle all the way to China, right? And then China would receive those bottles. They would load them up onto big trucks, drive that bottle to, again, another like recycling plant or manufacturing plant of some type, where they'd further clean the bottles, and then they would sell them to a facility that would purchase them, and that facility would then melt them down, right? And then they would make new stuff, and at the end of the day, they would turn my bottle in China into, let's say, a plastic airplane. They would then put it on a truck, back to and drive it back to the boat. The boat would then send it all the way back to the United States, and then it would get distributed and someone would come and buy it. So that seems like a pretty long loop in order to convert my bottle into a plastic airplane, right? It seems like there's a lot of negative environmental externalities there, right? There's a lot of environmental costs that aren't accounted for, and it seems like it's realistically should be a lot more expensive than $65 to purchase that, considering all the environmental costs associated to it. So from that perspective, I think it's actually better, unfortunately, to say this at this time, that my plastic bottle just gets dumped into my local landfill rather than going on this extremely long and environmentally expensive journey. Now, obviously, I don't want that to be our long-term solution, right? Like, we can't just keep dumping bottles into a landfill. That doesn't make any sense from a long-term standpoint, even if it seems like it makes sense from an environmental and economic standpoint short-term. I think something needs to be done, and an example of what could be done could be as simple as requiring that, say, 50% of all plastic bottles come from recycled plastic. And what doing something like that would do is essentially introduce a buyer into the system again. That is, instead of China, for example, it's like Pepsi or Coca-Cola who's buying these plastic materials in order to create their bottles that they then sell here in the United States. And really what that does is it then once again increases the demand or the need for recycled materials, meaning that these landfill companies, rather than just dumping it, or these waste management companies, rather than just dumping them into the landfill, they would instead be able to turn around, sort them, collect them, clean them, and send them to Pepsi, who is instead purchasing them, right? So it really once again incentivizes recycling rather than just the act of recycling where these companies are dumping your stuff in the landfill. So that's just one example, right? There's a lot of different ways you could once again introduce recycling into the United States. But one example, like I said, is to maybe put a requirement that plastic bottles need to be 50% plastic recycled material or something like that, right? And you could do the same thing with glass and paper and things like that. Just my thoughts, I don't know. So with that said, I hope you guys liked the video. I hope it kind of got your brain turning. I hope it brings up some decent discussions, maybe amongst you and your friends and family. If you liked this video and feel like it was thoughtful, please share it out, or feel free to like it or show your support with a subscribe. I would really appreciate it. It's always great to see that. But with that said, I really wish you guys the best. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and please stay awesome. See you guys.